Hello, hopefully you can hear me. Welcome to my weekly webinar, except for last week. So I'm Sue Knight, and each week I come online and try my very best to share some group work skills that I've used over the last 12 or 13 years. Trying to translate it online has been quite interesting for me. So I hope you find it useful. Just a few kind of practicalities. Usually when I do these kind of webinars, it's helpful for me if people are able to get involved. That's invitational, so it's not essential. I can do all of it without anybody getting involved, but it's nice to kind of have that connection going as well. So the way that you can do that, if you do want to share anything, is in the chat on the right hand side of your screen, or I think it might be at the bottom if you're looking on a phone. So these webinars are directed at people who are working in the recovery field. But in all the years that I've been doing it, what I've noticed is that often people apply it to themselves, to their own lives, which then kind of helps them to become better practitioners when they're helping service users and clients. It's quite an interesting model, the ACT matrix. It's used a lot in corporate kind of companies for coaching teams and coaching individuals. They coach to support people to see what gets in the way of them doing the difficult stuff in, I think they call it crisis management, but I don't know too much about that, so I'm not going to waffle on about that. So what we're going to do today, and what I do every week, is I do one loop of the matrix, show you how simple it is. If you've got experience of it, there are a few different adaptations of the matrix, and the one that I will be showing you is just one. So if you are familiar with other ones, they pretty much work the same way, just parts of it are in different places. So if you've got any questions as we go along, please do ask. I'll try my best to answer them. If I don't know immediately, then I will always get back to you. So it's experiential learning. I could sit and waffle on and try and explain it to you, but the best way to do this is to show you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen and we'll go through one loop of the matrix to start with. So hopefully you can see that fairly well. If you can't, just let me know and I will try and adjust it a bit. So this is what's called the Kevin Polk version. Noticing is at the centre, but how we usually start is going to the bottom right quadrant and asking individuals. So this is easy to kind of write up on a board if you're doing it in a group. That's how I've done it over the years, on a board behind me. You can just use a piece of paper if you're doing it in a one-to-one. You can just pick up a piece of paper, draw the lines on one side right towards, on the other right away, at the top write 5 senses or just senses, and then at the bottom mind. And then as you go along, you don't need to explain those different parts. As you go along, it becomes clearer to the individual. So always start on the bottom right and you simply ask the group or the individual who is important to you. So if you're willing to get involved and you want to write it in the chat box, that would be really helpful. So I'll start. So for me, my sons are important to me, my partner, my mum. Smaller. And you can't get this wrong. There's no right or wrong with this. people often will say like friends, and pets are a good one as well. People will mention like their dogs or their cats. And sometimes what you might notice or you might come across, especially in groups and when people first attend a group session, they might say, well, I don't know. And that's okay. So we're not trying to force stuff to come up. What will happen is over the weeks, people will start to connect and notice what it feels like when they're engaging in activities with other people, with kind of when they're forming relationships. So at the very beginning, you could ask somebody if they didn't have anything to share. Is it important to you to start to rediscover who's important to you? And most of the time, people will say yes. Okay, so we start with who's important. In some other models, they also include what's important. If people come up with stuff that's important to them, just add it. Don't kind of wrong them in any way. Don't say, oh, well, that's not a who, that's a what. Just add it, it's fine. And that's often stuff like health, education, some hobbies like social activities, yeah, and work, that kind of stuff. Okay, and that's what we're going to be looking at a bit later on after we've done this first loop. We're gonna explore and dive in a bit deeper into this values quadrant. So the who or what's important is actually values, and in ACT, which is what this model is based in, acceptance and commitment therapy, a large part of it is values work. And when people walk into services, values work is so helpful because it's a bit like a compass for people. Once they start to connect with what's important to them in their lives, they're able to kind of use that as a way of directing what they do, because what they do will be in the service of something greater, something bigger, something more important. Because often doing something new, which is what stepping onto the path of recovery is all about, it's not just about the absence of alcohol or drugs or whatever the addictive behaviour is. You get rid of that, yeah, great, massive, really difficult, and then what? It's about creating and building and shaping a life which is rich, meaningful, and has purpose. And that takes time to connect, but also that changes over time as well. So we don't want to get too rigid about what people value. And if somebody there doesn't value the same thing as the person sat next to them, then that's fine. It's a completely individual and unique process, this discovery of what's important. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. So next we move over, so we always start at the bottom. So we start on the bottom right and then we move over to the bottom left, and we invite people to share what they call it, like the yucky stuff, or what thoughts, feelings and physical sensations show up for you that you notice, and we also call them not ones. So these are all the thoughts, feelings, physical sensations that people experience. And in a group, you will invite everybody to share if they're willing. If they're not willing, that's fine. And then you just write it all up on the board. So I'll start, or a kind of standard one for me is fear and anxiety. So these are the thoughts, feelings, physical sensations that we do not want, that are just like, oh no, I'd rather not have them. So if there's any that you want to share, just write them down, that's fine, and I can add them to this. Some other stuff that I notice: stress, And then we have like the internal stories of the mind, like I'm not good enough, stuff like imposter syndrome, you know, where it's like, who am I to be doing this? I get this with these webinars, like, who am I to think that I could like share this stuff? So what else kind of shows up for me? Embarrassment and nerves. Embarrassed, nervous. And then I'll kind of make it general as well. Like fear of disapproval, feeling inadequate. How do you spell that? Inadequate. Oh, that's just about right. Let's do another little box over here. I hope you can see this. It's got really small. What else have we got? Regret. And then, of course, if we're working with people who are kind of pre-detox, it would be like withdrawals, cravings, thoughts of wanting to drink or use, thoughts of not wanting to drink. And then it can be stuff like shivers, sickness, feeling sick, on edge. So you get the general idea of what I mean by a not want. So hopefully that makes sense. And then in the top right, so we try and encourage as many of these lower left to be shared as possible. And the reason that this is really helpful, and especially as a facilitator we start, it really normalizes internal unwanted experience. I've had many times where I've shared that I get fearful and anxious, and people in the group will look kind of like, what, really? So it's kind of like, this is normal human experiences, internal stuff that we just, you know, it's not nice. Nobody likes it. The important thing is what we do when that shows up. So then this leads to the top left. So in the top left, I'd ask then the group or an individual, if you're doing this on a one-to-one, when that stuff in the bottom left shows up, that yucky stuff or those not wants, what do you do to find relief from it? Or also, what do you do to move away from it? And, you know, the kind of obvious answers that come up would be to drink or to use drugs. And then we open it up a bit more and we ask, what else do people do to move away from these not wants? Kind of avoidant behaviours, distracting, sleeping, binging on Netflix, that's one of my personal favourites, and eating, another one of my personal favourites, particularly chocolate. So if there's any that you want to share, you're more than welcome. So what do people do to move away from their not wants? You know, the stuff like exercise. You know, people exercise, get stressed, go for a run. Smoking. Oh, we didn't put boredom down here. That always comes up as well. Like boredom down in the lower left. And then a few more examples of behaviours. Might be gaming, like even stuff like swimming, meditating, like arguing, etc., etc. So get the general idea of what I mean by a behaviour to find relief from not once. So now what we do is we draw some arrows along here just to kind of show that when this stuff at the bottom shows up, this is what we do. What people do. And we can keep it general because this is part of our human experience. A lot of us, most of us, I would say nearly all of us, are spending time finding relief from our unwanted internal experience. And that's not a problem. You know, if you think about when you're cold, you don't want to be cold, what do? Put a jumper on. Solution. No problem. If you're hungry, what do? You go and eat something. Solution. No problem. Until it becomes a problem. And that's when it's starting to kind of get into habitual addictive tendencies. So what can happen is they're called loops. We get stuck in these loops. And we end up going round and round and round in kind of these unhelpful away loops. And that's basically what addiction is when life gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller because the individual will start to become dependent, or it's called specialization. They will become specialized in one or two behaviors to find relief from their not wants. And life gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And the reason that people keep doing it is because it works. I'm not going to stand here and say it doesn't work, but it only works in the short term. And what starts to happen is that it creates more not wants, more of the lower left stuff in the long term, which is why life gets smaller and smaller. Because all of the lower left stuff will always keep arising because that's part of being a human being. And the solution to it is the thing that causes more of a problem. So that's a very brief explanation of how the matrix can be a really helpful tool to explain how addiction happens. So this is the left-hand side, which is the away moves. And the function of away moves is to find relief from internal unwanted experience. And that's it in a nutshell. Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not. When you become addicted to something, often what's happened is that at some point it's started to create more problems than it's solving. And you're not noticing what's happening until you're in your kind of pit of consequences. Okay, so now we move over to the upper right hand side, and this is around kind of behaviours again. Observable behaviours which move you closer to the people who are important to you. And some examples of them for me are taking my sons to football, doing this webinar, spending time swimming in the sea with my friends. So the behaviour would be swimming in the sea. And other stuff would be kind of going for a walk with my partner, like in the countryside. And then again, you know, you can ask the group or the individual, what behaviours have you done over the last week or so which has moved you closer to the stuff that's important to you? Or you can use it as a tool to help people to decide what they want to do over the next week or two. So that's the commitment stuff. So Again, ACT stands for acceptance and commitment training or therapy. So the commitment is in what are you going to do? What's the behavior that you're going to do? The values are or who's important to you. And then experimenting with your clients, not about whether they are successful in what they've committed to do, but more about helping them to connect and start to explore what's important to them and what they can do to align their behaviours to that. Because when you align your behaviours to something greater, when this lower left stuff comes up, the yucky stuff, you're going to be more willing to have it and take it with you in the service of something greater. So an example of that might be job interviews. I hate job interviews. They're like the worst possible thing I could think of in terms of bringing up all the not wants for me. I get nervous, anxious, fearful. My mouth goes really dry. I start shaking. I go bright red. My voice starts wobbling. My chest gets really tight. I get all sorts of stories about, completely fucking it all up. But I still go. I still am willing to go because my connection to what I'm doing it for is quite strong. So I hope that makes sense. So when you're connected to your values, your willingness to do difficult stuff becomes stronger. And a rich and meaningful life often means doing difficult stuff. So when you're stuck in the left-hand side, always avoiding the difficult, that's why life gets smaller. If you're able to step into the right-hand side from time to time, the likelihood is that life will start to get bigger. You'll experience more. And you test stuff out. It's like, okay, so I'm going to try something new. I remember years ago, my life had got really, really small, and I started to do new stuff. So I went to, I don't know why I laugh, because this is quite cool, but I went and joined I joined the gym, and then I went and joined an astronomical society. I only went like once. But I really like the universe. I really like the stars. I love all that kind of stuff, like the wonder of it all, the awe of it all, the mystery of it all, and just looking at the stars. And so I kind of went, and it was full of people who you could imagine would be part of an astronomical society. Astronomers, yeah. And it was just that, kind of just trying and testing new stuff. I went, it was cool, but it was like, I don't think this is for me, so I didn't go back. But life gets bigger because there's stuff that I did do, like sea swimming, for example. That can be pretty brutal. But it's really satisfying. And towards behaviours are often really satisfying. And so it's not about what your mind says should be important. It's about how it feels to do towards moves. So there's a different quality to how it feels when you move towards a rich and meaningful life, as opposed to when your behaviours are all about trying to rid yourself of suffering. I hope that makes sense. I've kind of waffled on a bit about it. So it's really important to say with clients, it's not all about doing towards moves, because we are hardwired to do away moves. So it's about getting more of a balance. So the likelihood is when you walk into a service, or when a client has walked into a service, their away moves will far outweigh their towards moves. So they will probably be doing like 99-95% away moves. It's about shifting it up just a bit more and a bit more, so that, maybe at best, all humans at best, and this is kind of optimal, you'd be 50-50. But the likelihood is that a life which is rich and meaningful, maybe 70-80. So that would be 70% away moves, 30% towards moves. And that's even a good kind of inquiry to do with clients, is kind of like asking them percentage wise, where do you think you are? Okay, so also at the top is the senses. So this is about bringing your awareness into the present moment. And behaviors are at the top as well, because this is experiencing the world as it's happening. We're often caught down at the bottom in our minds. So we spend most of our time up here in our minds, thinking stories, narratives, all of that kind of stuff. And then what we are inviting clients to do is to reawaken into the senses, because when you wake up into the senses and you notice what's happening in real time, because this is kind of present moment is the reality of real time, you've got more control over what you're doing, over your behaviors. If you're on autopilot and stuck in your mind, the likelihood is that you're just going to keep doing what autopilot is designed to do, and that's to get rid of pain and suffering. Whereas when you wake up into your senses, into the present moment, you've got access to a different kind of wisdom, which is more that kind of felt sense of what's right in that moment. And you then choose, if you want to keep doing the same old shit and you'll get the same old consequences, or you can start to look at and get creative with opening up into new stuff, which is all very easy to explain and it's really hard to do, which is why supporting clients when they don't do what they say they're going to do is just as helpful to big them up when they do what they say they're going to do. Because if they're noticing what gets in the way, the lower left stuff, from them doing the top right stuff, then it's working, because it's in the noticing that is the most important thing, is noticing what's happening as it's happening and then sharing it with a group or a worker. Okay, so I hope that makes some sense. What we're going to do now, let me just stop sharing my screen for a minute, get my notes. Okay, so what we're going to do now is look at a activity called Back to the Future. And this activity is to help clients to connect with what's important to them and how that kind of feels inside their hearts. So we're going to be doing a very simple activity, which, let me just share my screen again. Which basically invites clients to, or the group, to think about the idea of imagining that we all went off, we left, either if you're in a rehab or a group, we all went our separate ways and recovery went well for everybody. So this is the most important thing. Recovery went well. And we all came back together and had we all connected in 5 years from now. And we were able to share what our lives had been like over that period of time and where we were at in 5 years' time. And this is the kind of what's important stuff. So as you can see, I've added 6 different domains. And the first domain is we would invite individuals to get into smaller groups and to talk to each other about what their relationships might be like in 5 years. So that might be if they've had some disconnect with certain people in their lives, they might have started to connect in with them again, whether that be parents or children or friends. And you can kind of just, it is using imagination. So obviously there's no way of knowing that this would ever be the case, but it's helping people to start imagining what they want their lives to be like. Because once you start thinking about possibilities, you're more likely to get that felt sense of, right, this is what I want to move towards, even if it brings up difficulty, pain, uncertainty. So these are the different domains. So they would go round individually and talk just for a minute or two about what their relationships might be like in 5 years, had their recovery gone well, what their family life might be like in 5 years, what work they might be doing or working towards in 5 years, and that can include education, training, courses, personal development. That can be really broad. It could be anything from, again, courses, training, exercising, work, counselling, therapy, all of that kind of stuff. And health as well. Often people come into services and their health isn't so great at that point, and if they kind of keep moving in the direction of recovery, stuff like that, their liver will start to function better. They will start to not have so many health problems potentially, or if that isn't possible, at least they're kind of able to maintain a current level of health. And what that might look like. So what might they need to do to maintain that? And that can include stuff like how they're eating, how they're exercising, what they're consuming, mind and body. And then social and recreation. That could be anything. So again, in 5 years, this could be like the most fantastical thing. I've had people saying stuff around kind of caving and sailing and swimming across lakes, traveling the world, anything. And this is kind of just getting the mind and heart into a place where it can start to really feel possibilities. So individuals going round, talking to each other just for a few minutes, sharing, connecting with these different domains. And then you'll come back together as a group or on a one-to-one, and you see if anybody wants to share what they noticed during that exercise. And then as a facilitator, you kind of encourage whatever they've shared. Obviously, if somebody says that they want to be an astronaut and they're like 60, it's kind of like, okay. But people never... 99, actually 100% of all the groups that I've ever done, the stuff that people say they want in 5 years is never unachievable. It's kind of like they're not asking for the world. They're asking for standard things in life, like healthy relationships and a job, which is the possibility is there. So then the final part of the group is to give everybody a piece of paper and a pen, and for them to spend some time, 10 minutes or so, writing themselves a letter. So a letter that is written to them now in 2022 from their future self. So their selves in 5 years, that self which has 5 years of recovery behind them, that has started to create that rich and meaningful life, which is got purpose, and they've worked towards all those different domains. And that 5 year from now self will write a letter of encouragement to themselves now and giving them some advice. Nobody needs to read the letter, it's just for them. Sometimes we say to people, would you like us to send it to you in 3 months' time? Some people say yes, some people want to take it away with them. And I've done this group a few times, and I've received the letter through the post like 3 months later, and I look at the envelope and I'm like, that's my handwriting. Because you forget, and then you open it and you're like, oh wow, yeah. So I've got one here. We get cards, or it can be a piece of paper, but sometimes it's really lovely to have like a card. And I'm happy to read it out. So mine says, "Dear Sue, be there for Max at this time. He needs you to listen. Don't give advice, just listen. Slow down and connect with the boys. Give James some space to do his thing. Work less while you can. Practice more, sit more, and enjoy the summer. You can be a great teacher, just continue to deepen your practice." And then in capitals, I've got, be kind to yourself. You are doing a great job. Love, Sue. And the thing is, I must have written this probably about, 6 or 7 years ago. And I dug it out today because I was like, I'm going to do this group. I'd like to kind of give an example of something that I wrote to myself. And even reading it then, it's like, those kind of things that I was working on then, they still arise for me now. It's my relationship to them that has changed. So yeah, it's a really lovely, helpful thing to do. So that's kind of that group in summary. So I hope that you may decide to go away and use it. And if you have any questions, then you can always email me. My email address I'll put up here on the chat. So it's sue.knight290@gmail.com. And also I have a website address which has got more information about what I do and these webinars. So if you want to share that with anyone else, then that's there. So that's sueknightrecovery.co.uk. I try and do these webinars every week. Each week I'll always do the matrix, and then I'll do a different activity that you can use in one-to-ones or groups. But yeah, if you've got any questions, then just email me, and hopefully this has been helpful in some way. Okay, thank you for listening, and hopefully see you again.